Hi everyone! In part one of this video series, I showed you how I made a free roam room for my ball python Jerry so he can enjoy some extra enrichment outside of his enclosure. And I really look forward to being able to give that same kind of freedom to my Boa Constrictor Ray and take him outside so he can enjoy the grass and the sunshine. But I think Ray is still a little bit too small for that. He's still small enough to be able to get himself into a tight spot if I'm not careful. And just like Jerry, Ray has a very spacious enclosure with lots of natural environmental enrichment. But I want to give him more than that. So I decided to build Ray a climbing tree so he can spend some time outside of his enclosure without always being in my hands. This was pretty easy to make. I already had some extra tree limbs in my garage just waiting for a future project. These were some extra sycamore limbs left over from when I rebuilt my day gecko's vivarium, and they're just what I needed for this climbing tree. I took this big ceramic flower pot that's been sitting in my garage for a long time. I mixed up some concrete and filled the pot about halfway with it, and then set the limbs into the concrete. And after the concrete dried, I cleaned it up and brought it into the reptile room. One thing I didn't think about when I set up this reptile room, and I wish I had, was to make it more friendly to free roam the snakes, but I didn't. There are so many places a snake can go in here, behind and under very heavy pieces of furniture with vivariums on top of them, where I just wouldn't be able to get to them. So if Ray enjoys using this tree, and I hope he does, I'm going to have to watch him really closely to make sure he doesn't decide to go anywhere he might get himself into trouble. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about is that boas are very strong snakes. Sometimes I want to take him out of his enclosure, but I can't because he's wrapped himself tightly around one of the branches. I can see a potential for Ray to wrap his body around one of these limbs on the climbing tree and decide he doesn't want to come off of it. And if he does do that, then I'm just going to be stuck in here watching after him until he decides to let go and come down. I knew Ray would be very interested in this climbing tree because I brought it into the reptile room a few days ago, and I've seen Ray just staring at it from inside of his enclosure. Ray is a little over 2 years old, and he's only known two things in his life: being in his enclosure or being in my hands. Although he's as tame and sweet as a kitten and very accustomed to me handling him, he's never known any kind of freedom outside of his enclosure. In the past, I've tried a little bit to teach Ray that he can have the freedom of choice for when he wants to come out of his enclosure. I'd open Ray's enclosure and just sit waiting for him to come out on his own, but he hasn't wanted to do that. My hope is that if Ray enjoys climbing on this and learns that he can come out and climb on his tree, I might finally be able to give him that freedom of choice for when he wants to come in or out of his enclosure. I think Ray obviously likes it, and that makes me happy. I wasn't surprised that he found the highest spot and just got comfortable there. He actually just stayed in this spot for a couple of hours before I decided it was time to put him back in his enclosure. And I'm really happy with how it turned out too. I think it's beautiful. The pot I used kind of looks like the type of basket or pot that a snake charmer in India would use for their cobras. And Ray looks beautiful perched on these limbs. So we'll see. I can see letting Ray relax on his tree while I do all the chores I need to do in here. If Ray likes it enough to keep using it, maybe this will become a permanent fixture in the reptile room. Or at least until he outgrows it, which he surely will. So that's all I have for today. I hope I've given you some ideas about how you can give your snakes a little bit more enrichment outside of their enclosures. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.